I had a conversation with Democratic Congressman Seth Moulton. Now, this is a really interesting situation. Seth Moulton is vacating his congressional seat to primary Massachusetts Senator Ed Markey. The seat that is being vacated by Seth, we have friend of the show Dan Coe, who has filled in for me before, running for that seat. And so far, that campaign is doing really well. I spoke to Seth about number one, the age factor as a reason that he is choosing to primary Senator Markey. I spoke to him about areas in which he disagrees with his own party, the Democratic Party. I asked him whether he would have voted to end the shutdown along with these eight Democratic senators last night, and so much more. I think it's a really interesting conversation. We also talked about him returning APAC money. Let's get into that conversation now. I want to start on this issue of generational change and age. I'm very interested in it because I've been saying we do have a sort of gerontocracy here in the United States. And whether it's an issue of an age limit or term limits or some combination of years plus age, like some places employ, I am interested in the idea of having elected officials that on average more closely mirror the median adult age of the population. How much is the age factor playing into the timing and choice to start this primary against Senator Markey? And how much are non-age factors at play?
Listen, I think one of the fundamental things that Democrats need to do is listen more to the people that we represent. We're a party known for standing on a pedestal and preaching down at people. And I'll just say that when I walk around Massachusetts, I hear people talking about age, talking about the need for new leadership. And it really is this sense that old people control the party and there's a massive leadership vacuum. So it's time to let a new generation of leaders step up and take over.
When it comes to the age issue, I also am sort of sensitive to the idea of age versus sharpness and acuity. And I
Sure.
think there's a big difference between someone, like a Bernie Sanders, who seems not to have lost a step at all. And, there's a list of folks that we could include in the kind of examples where we do have concerns there. When it comes to your opponent, is age alone the factor, or do you have any concerns around acuity or sharpness?
No, it's really a sense that it's just the establishment, the status quo, and unwillingness to change. I mean, one of the first things I've said I will do is vote against Senator Schumer because the establishment is not getting it done. And I don't sense any willingness to go against the establishment from Senator Markey. You know, he's always been a go along to get along kind of guy. And I've been the opposite of that. I mean, I've been someone who's challenged the establishment my entire career, from running against an 18-year incumbent to first come to Congress, to setting up Serve America, an organization to recruit veterans from outside, the party insiders like the DCCC to run in critical House races. We were accountable for more than half the seats Democrats flipped in 2018 to take back the House the last time Trump was in the White House. And so I've never been unafraid of challenging the status quo. And I'll tell you, David, sometimes that's a pretty unpopular position in our party, right? That's not always loved. But right now, voters tell me they feel it's urgently needed.
If you were in the Senate right now, would you have voted to reopen the government with this group of senators last night who want to do that, with what seems to me nothing more than the promise of a middle of December vote on what to do about the healthcare subsidies?
Absolutely not. I mean, I just don't even understand what is going on here. And I have to ask the question, Senator Schumer, what are you thinking here? You are the leader of Democrats in the Senate, and it looks like you just had the longest government shutdown in history and got nothing in return for opening government back up. Meanwhile, you have Donald Trump literally going to the Supreme Court to sue to keep people in breadlines. He's trying to use the Supreme Court to prevent getting people the food they need to survive the weekend. I mean, it's insane. And you're going to give in to this? That's
Would
nuts.
you would you when we spoke to Congressman Jake Auchincloss, he presented an idea that many in my audience liked, which is that the important departments of our federal government should really be funded, number one, separately from this process that leads to a shutdown? And number two, on different timelines. So, like for example, this is just an example. Maybe DoD, because of its importance and relevance, is on a 5-year funding cycle, which might overlap one way or another with other departments and with who's in power. On the other hand, maybe transportation is 10 years, or maybe it's only two. The point is, take away leverage from these shutdowns to cripple elements of the government. Do you like an idea like that?
I mean, look, I think I used to sit in the budget committee and always advocated for having larger or longer budget timelines because we would make much better long-term decisions for the country if we weren't always trying to do short-term funding, right? And trying to meet some monetary target a year out or even 10 years out when investing in something like education has horizons that are 20 or 30 years. So I agree with that in general. By the way, making DoD a 5-year timeline just would be way too slow to keep up with how rapidly war is changing. I mean, on a 5-year timeline, we would have missed the whole drone revolution happening in Ukraine because that war started less than 5 years ago.
Yeah.
So you got to be careful about what timelines you choose, especially in such a fast-paced world. But in general, the idea, is a good one. But the focus should really be on just, where are the places where we need to have longer timelines for investment to make the right decisions for the American people instead of always making short-term political decisions that just benefit people's political careers.
On the topic of the tax system in the United States, I often ask this question and I get very different answers. Where would you like to see the top marginal tax rate set at the federal level? And at what income would that kick in?
I don't know what the exact number should be, but here's the bottom line. Right now, it's incredible that after years of complaining about billionaires, private equity folks, and everyone else sort of getting off scot-free and not paying the level of taxes or the rates of taxes that their own, assistants pay, that hasn't been fixed. And actually, the Trump administration is making it a lot worse. So what the American people want is not just a bunch of, wonky politicians saying, okay, well, this is the number that we need to hit, but to really feel like everyone's just paying their fair share. I don't like a tax system where there's a bunch of people who pay nothing. I think it's a great idea for everyone to feel like they're pitching in. But it's also the case that you shouldn't get tax breaks because you have a private jet. You shouldn't get tax breaks because you have friends at the IRS. The New York Times reported recently that they've awarded about $250 billion in free tax breaks to corporations that just have good lobbyists connected with Trump administration officials working at the IRS. I mean, that's insane.
Well, let
So,
me put it a different way then, if I
sure.
can.
And I don't mean to avoid answering the question. I just
Yeah,
think, look, I don't know what the exact number is, I'll be honest with you. But clearly, what we have right now is not cutting it.
that's fair. And even without knowing the exact number, I'll put it a different way. For a long time, the debate in this country has basically been, should the top tax rate be 37 or 39.6? That's where a lot of the debate has been. There is an approach, and to be honest, I am not a let's reach for higher income taxes as the first step. Let's actually look at what we're spending, where we're spending, et cetera, right? But there are some who would say we absolutely need a top marginal tax rate that has a 4 at the beginning of it. There are others who would say it would be 5 or okay. The other approach would be actually what we need to really be doing is looking at capital gains because the very wealthy are not really earning income which is affected by that top marginal tax rate anyway, or looking at a minimum tax that is stronger so that the scenario you describe isn't possible because you can't deduct and loophole your way down, even though you're in that top tax bracket. Do you favor an approach of that top number should be bigger than 37 or 39, or more the latter that I just mentioned about dealing with deductions, capital gains, et cetera?
I think I'm a little bit more in favor of the latter. I think that, it'd be reasonable to raise the top marginal rate a little bit. But there's a way in which we want to incentivize investment when it creates jobs, when it makes our society better. Like we want to make it really cheap, percentage wise to invest in infrastructure, for example. I'm a huge champion of infrastructure. I have the most ambitious high-speed rail plan in America today, which, by the way, isn't even, candidly as ambitious as what they're doing in China. But that's the kind of investment that we need to be making in the future of our country, and we should incentivize that investment and make it cheaper for it to be possible in the U.S. But there are a lot of people in America who have so much money that they don't work at all. Like they're just sitting on wealth.
Yes.
And that's the problem. That wealth is not productive. It's productive in the sense that it allows them to have private jets and private yachts, but it's not doing anything for the rest of us. It's not doing anything to make the country better. And that's where we should actually be looking at taxing.
I was interested to hear that you're returning some money that was previously given to you by APAC. And I'm personally very interested in this as someone who recently has been accused of having a show funded by APAC money. I've never received a penny, never mind a dollar from APAC, but I'm very interested in the sort of cultural presence that this is having right now. Senator Booker recently did an interview with Jennifer Welch where he was asked about this. Governor Gavin Newsom was asked about APAC funding. Talk to me about why and what do you think is the reason why this is getting so much attention today?
Look, I think it's getting attention because there's a difference between supporting a country, like supporting Israel and its right to defend itself, its right to have its citizens thrive in peace, and supporting a partisan agenda, which is really what AIPAC has decided to do in just unabashedly supporting Bibi Netanyahu. No matter what he does, and they're also choosing sides in American politics, and I think in both cases they're on the wrong side. I want a strong U.S.-Israel relationship, but I do not support Netanyahu, and I've been very strongly outspoken against many of the things he's done, especially the conduct of this war that has left so many innocent people killed, which takes nothing away from the horrific attacks on October 7th. But the bottom line is that we shouldn't have innocent people dying in this conflict whenever we can avoid it. And that's one of the many disagreements that I've had with Bibi Netanyahu. And too often I've seen AIPAC just side with Netanyahu. So after trying for a while to get them to distance themselves from Netanyahu and from his leadership and from his decisions, it became apparent to me that they weren't going to do so. And so I declined their support.
One of the things that I find really interesting about the discussion around this is that I think in a lot of circles, it's become a proxy for something different. In other words, that the APAC money in and of itself isn't really the issue, but it's a desire from some to have elected officials take certain positions on the actual conflict. And it sounds like what you're saying is you've been clear about your positions on the conflict for a period of time. You just, if I understand you correctly, now believe that APAC is an unproductive interlocutor of sorts between you and what you would like to see happen. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, it's a great way to put it, in fact. And there are plenty of other interlocutors that I think are being more effective. AIPAC says its mission is to strengthen the U.S.-Israel relationship, but if you just look at Congress right now and the number of lawmakers who are disagreeing either publicly or privately with AIPAC, and it's starting on the right too. It's not just an issue on the left.
Mm-hmm.
It's really hard to say that they're succeeding in that mission.
Very
Israel's our
much
most
not. Yeah.
important ally in the Middle East, and yet we should be able to disagree with them and their government, right? Like when I go overseas and I meet with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, they don't say, "Oh, well, we're the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, so of course we support Donald Trump and the tariffs." No, they think it's terrible, and they're not afraid to say so. And they have an important role in facilitating the relationship between our economy back here at home and our economic interests abroad. That's why they have presence in cities all around the globe. That's why congressional delegations meet with them when we travel. So I just wish AIPAC would more broadly represent the true range of opinions of supporters of Israel in the United States and also Israeli Jews. I mean, let's not forget that Netanyahu was booed in Hostage Square when the hostages were returned. I mean, that should have been
Yep.
his triumph, and he was booed by his own people. So clearly, there's a lot of diversity of opinion here, and I would like to see AIPAC better represent that.
Last thing I want to ask you about, what issue right now would you say you are most distant from the kind of median view of Democrats in the House and Senate right now, where you find yourself saying, here's where I really believe that I am furthest from the average of my colleagues?
Well, it's an interesting question because if you talk about what people are saying behind the scenes, it's very different than what people are saying, in person, right?
Hmm.
And just in this Senate race, for example, I'm going all over Massachusetts. I'm talking to a lot of people, including a lot of elected representatives, who endorsed Ed Markey because Senator Markey asked for their endorsement a long time before anyone was in this race, and ostensibly they're out supporting. This senator who is our junior senator, and he'd be 86 at the end of his next term if he's reelected. And yet, privately in person, they tell me, Seth, we desperately need new leadership in our party. And this is a position that I found myself in before, back in 2018. A lot of the Serve America candidates that I supported, including people like Abigail Spanberger, who just became governor of Virginia, and Mikey Sherrill, who just became governor of New Jersey. I mean, these are amazing leaders, and many of them ran on a platform of new leadership in the Democratic Party. And I was hearing this from many of my colleagues in Congress as well, but very few were willing to stick their neck out and actually fight for it. But I think this is a time when we need to fight for leadership that's new and different and bringing new ideas to the table and is willing to break with the status quo. That's not easy for the establishment to do, but I'm one of the few who's willing to stick my neck out and try to get it done.
Okay, so let me push back a little. I don't think I necessarily heard an answer to my question there. So, for example, I think I'm on nuclear power quite different from the average of the left, where I've become convinced that a lot of the concerns about safety are not accurate. Although I'm not going out there saying, let's do nuclear, I want to go to renewables. I have a different view on the safety of nuclear, for example. Is there some issue, whether it's tax policy, energy, whatever, where you say, here's where I think I'm less in line with where my party is on this issue?
Well, I'll give you an example. It's another issue where the science doesn't always line up with the facts.
Okay.
Um, GMOs. Everyone hates GMOs in the Democratic Party because we want to go to Whole Foods and buy organic stuff, right?
Yep.
But most people can't afford to go to Whole Foods. And in fact, a lot of people would literally be dying in Africa right now without GMOs because they enable crops that require a lot less water and can be productive with the same nutrients. So you have to always be careful that you're not just genetically engineering the environment and that things don't get out of control. I mean, of course, there are reasonable concerns here, but actually, GMOs literally feed a lot of the world. Like they save a lot of lives and they protect the environment where they can grow crops and not use as much water as would otherwise be required. So, for again, those Democrats who like to stand on a pedestal and preach about, how perfect they are and they can afford to go to Whole Foods, then buying all organic is great. But the rest of us have to live in the real world.
I'm with you on this one. And by the way, we have not determined that GMOs are less healthy for human consumption, and it has been studied, despite what a lot of people say. So I'm very much on board with you
Yeah.
on that one.
And by the way, like I was shopping in a farmer's market last weekend, and when people can afford to do that and when you can support local businesses, I'm all for it. And we got some amazing tomatoes that my girls loved, right? So like I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with local or organic farming, but you
Of
got to
course.
look at the big picture and realize that there are a lot of people like the folks who are standing in line just trying to get food while Donald Trump is trying to shut down food pantries right now
Yep.
who can't afford that. And then go overseas and see how people are struggling to eat in a lot of parts of the world and are only surviving because of this innovative agriculture that in many cases was brought to them by the United States of America.
We've been speaking with Congressman Seth Moulton, now running in the Democratic primary to be senator from Massachusetts. Really appreciate your time today. We're following this one closely.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me.